What happens when Hollywood's most beloved actor meets late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Pedro Pascal sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. The explosive confrontation that erupted last night has sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry, leaving viewers stunned and social media ablaze with heated debates. The atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel live studio felt different from the moment Pedro Pascal walked onto the stage. What should have been a celebratory appearance to promote his latest project quickly transformed into television's most uncomfortable confrontation. The tension was palpable as Pascal, known for his warm demeanor and genuine personality, took his seat across from Kimmel, who seemed unusually aggressive from the opening moments. "Pedro, great to have you back," Kimmel began with his trademark smirk, but there was something cold beneath the surface pleasantries. "Though I have to say, you've been making quite a few political statements lately. Some people are saying you should stick to acting instead of lecturing audiences about social issues." Pascal's expression shifted immediately. The smile that had greeted the audience just moments earlier began to fade, as he processed what felt like an ambush rather than the friendly interview he'd been promised by the show's producers. "I'm sorry, Jimmy, but I think there's a difference between using your platform responsibly and lecturing people. I've always been open about my values." "Values, sure," Kimmel interrupted, his voice taking on a mocking tone that seemed to catch even his own audience off guard. "But don't you think it's a bit hypocritical to preach about social justice while making millions from a Disney franchise? I mean, we all know Disney's track record with human rights issues." The studio audience grew noticeably quieter, sensing that this wasn't the typical light-hearted banter they'd come to expect. Pascal straightened in his chair, his jaw tightening, as he chose his words carefully. "Jimmy, I'm not sure what you're trying to get at here, but I've been consistent in my beliefs long before any major film roles. My activism isn't performative. It comes from personal experience and genuine concern for marginalized communities." Kimmel leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with what appeared to be calculated malice. "Personal experience? Come on, Pedro. You grew up privileged, went to expensive schools, and now you're worth tens of millions. What do you really know about struggle? Isn't this all just virtue signaling to maintain your Hollywood image?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. Pascal's hands clenched slightly as he fought to maintain his composure, but those watching closely could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. "That's completely out of line, Jimmy. You don't know anything about my family's history or what we've been through." "Oh, I know plenty," Kimmel shot back with a cruel laugh. "I do my research. Your family fled Chile when you were a baby, sure, but you've lived a pretty comfortable life since then. Don't you think it's a bit convenient to play the immigrant card when it suits your narrative?" The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. Even Kimmel's usually loyal audience seemed taken aback by the host's aggressive approach. Pascal's face had gone pale, and his voice dropped to a dangerously quiet level. "I think we need to change the subject right now." But Kimmel wasn't finished. He seemed emboldened by Pascal's obvious discomfort, like a predator sensing weakness. "Look, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Hollywood loves a good sob story, and the whole child of refugees angle certainly helps with certain demographics, doesn't it? Especially when you're pushing political agendas that—" "Stop." Pascal's voice cut through Kimmel's words like a blade. "Just stop talking." The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel it. But Kimmel, feeding off the tension like a vulture, pushed forward with reckless abandon. His producers in the control room were frantically signaling for him to change course, but he was too intoxicated by the drama to notice or care. "Oh, come on, Pedro. Don't get all sensitive on me now," Kimmel taunted, his voice dripping with false concern. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. The moment someone asks you a real question, you shut down. Isn't that what you accuse politicians of doing?" Pascal's breathing had become visibly controlled. the kind of measured restraint that suggested a man on the very edge of losing it completely. "Jimmy, I came here as a courtesy. I thought we were friends. What is this really about?" "Friends?" Kimmel laughed, but it was harsh and brittle. "Friends don't lecture each other through social media posts. Friends don't use award shows as political platforms. And friends certainly don't go on other shows and criticize hosts for not being woke enough." The reference was clearly aimed at Pascal's recent comments on a podcast where he'd discussed the responsibility of entertainers to address social issues. He'd never mentioned Kimmel by name, but apparently the host had taken it personally. Pascal's eyes widened as he realized this entire ambush had been planned. "You're taking something I said completely out of context," Pascal said, his voice strained but still attempting diplomacy. "I never called out any specific person. I was speaking generally about our industry's responsibility." "Generally?" Kimmel's voice rose mockingly. "You said, and I quote, 'Some hosts think they can stay neutral while the world burns around them, but neutrality is complicity.' That sounds pretty specific to me, Pedro." The audience was now completely silent, witnessing what felt like a public execution disguised as entertainment. Pascal shifted uncomfortably, realizing that Kimmel had indeed done his homework. Malicious homework designed to humiliate and corner him. "If you felt that was directed at you, maybe you should ask yourself why," Pascal responded, his diplomatic mask finally beginning to slip. "I stand by what I said about the responsibility we all have." Kimmel's eyes flashed dangerously. "Responsibility. Let me tell you about responsibility. I've been doing this show for over 2 decades. I've entertained millions of people, provided jobs for hundreds of crew members, and raised millions for charity. What have you done besides play dress-up for cameras and post Instagram stories?" The insult landed like a physical blow. Pascal's face flushed red, and his hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. "Play dress-up? Is that what you think acting is?" "Isn't it?" Kimmel pressed, sensing he had found his target. "You put on costumes, memorize lines someone else wrote, and pretend to be someone you're not. Meanwhile, real people are doing real work to make actual change in the world." Pascal stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force of his movement. The audience gasped collectively, and even Kimmel seemed momentarily startled by the intensity of Pascal's reaction. "Real work?" Pascal's voice was low and dangerous now. "You want to talk about real work, Jimmy? My sister is a doctor. She saves lives every day. My family fled a dictatorship where people were murdered for speaking out. I've used my platform to raise awareness and funds for refugee organizations, LGBTQ+ youth, and disaster relief. What exactly do you do besides mock people? For caring?" Kimmel tried to regain control, but the power dynamic had shifted dramatically. "I'm just trying to have a conversation here, Pedro. No need to get so worked up." "Worked up?" Pascal's voice cracked with emotion and fury. "You ambushed me on national television, attacked my family's story, belittled my profession, and questioned my integrity. And you think I'm just worked up?" The studio lights seemed to intensify the heat of the moment, casting harsh shadows across both men's faces. Kimmel's smirk had finally disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like fear as he realized he had pushed too far. "Look, maybe we should take a commercial break," Kimmel suggested weakly, glancing toward his producers. "No," Pascal said firmly, his voice carrying across the silent studio. "You wanted to have this conversation on your show, in front of your audience. Let's finish it." The tension had reached a fever pitch, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. Pascal remained standing, towering over Kimmel, who suddenly looked small and vulnerable behind his desk. The usual late-night comedy atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by something raw and uncomfortable. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy?" Pascal's voice carried a deadly calm that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "You've confused cynicism with intelligence, cruelty with comedy. You think tearing people down makes you clever, but it just makes you sad. Kimmel's face flushed red as he tried to salvage his authority. Don't lecture me about comedy, Pedro. I've been doing this since before you were relevant. You're just another actor who thinks fame gives you wisdom. Relevant? Pascal laughed bitterly. You're sitting here attacking me because you're threatened by the idea that entertainers should care about something beyond ratings and ad revenue. When did caring become controversial? The audience was transfixed, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming television history. Kimmel's security team stood uncertainly at the edges of the set, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. You want to know what's really going on here? Pascal continued, his voice gaining strength. You're angry because your brand of humor is dying. People are tired of punching down, tired of lazy jokes at the expense of marginalized communities. You see people like me speaking out, and it reminds you that your approach is outdated. Kimmel shot up from his chair, finally matching Pascal's stance. My approach? My approach has entertained millions of people. I don't need validation from some sanctimonious actor who thinks he's saving the world one Instagram post at a time. At least I'm trying to do something positive with my platform, Pascal shot back. What do? Make jokes about people's appearances? Mock politicians while pretending to be above politics? You're a coward, Jimmy. You hide behind just comedy while contributing nothing meaningful to the world. The words hit Kimmel like physical blows. His face contorted with rage as he stepped around his desk, moving closer to Pascal. How dare you call me a coward? I've taken on presidents, corporations, and controversial topics when it mattered. When it was safe, Pascal countered, not backing down an inch. When it was popular opinion. When did you ever take a real risk? When did you ever sacrifice anything for your beliefs? Kimmel was visibly shaking now, his carefully constructed television persona completely shattered. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what it's like to carry a show, to be responsible for hundreds of jobs, to navigate network politics. Then maybe you shouldn't have made this personal, Pascal said coldly. You could have asked me about my work, my projects, anything professional. Instead, you chose to attack my heritage, my family's trauma, and my integrity. That says everything about who you really are. The studio had become a pressure cooker of tension. Crew members stood frozen, unsure whether to keep filming or cut away. The band sat in stunned silence, their instruments forgotten. Even the usually chatty audience was completely quiet, sensing they were witnessing a career-defining moment. For both men, Kimmel's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. You think you're better than me because you give to charity and post about social causes? It's all performance, Pedro. Everything you do is calculated to maintain your image as the good guy of Hollywood. Pascal's composure finally cracked completely. Performance? You want to talk about performance? My father was tortured under Pinochet's regime. My family fled our home country with nothing. I've watched friends die from diseases that could have been prevented with better health care. Those aren't performances, Jimmy. That's life. That's why I speak out. The revelation hung in the air like a bomb. Even Kimmel seemed stunned by the raw emotion and pain in Pascal's voice. For a moment, the host looked almost human again, as if realizing he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But the moment passed quickly. Kimmel's defensive walls slammed back into place. Everyone has a sob story, Pedro. That doesn't give you the right to lecture the rest of us about how to live our lives. Pascal stared at him with a mixture of disgust and pity. You're right, Jimmy. Everyone does have a story. The difference is, I use mine to try to help others. You use yours to justify being cruel. The silence that followed was deafening. Pascal looked around the studio, taking in the shocked faces of the audience, the uncomfortable expressions of the crew, and finally Kimmel's defeated posture. Something fundamental had shifted in the room. "I think we're done here," Pascal said quietly, but his words carried to every corner of the studio. He began to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Come on, Pedro, sit down. Let's talk about your new project. That's why you're here, right?" Pascal paused, the microphone halfway off his lapel, and looked directly into Kimmel's eyes. What he saw there, desperation, fear, and a complete lack of remorse, seemed to make his final decision for him. He let out a slow breath and shook his head with what looked like genuine sadness. "No, Jimmy. We're not going to pretend this didn't happen. We're not going to pivot to some pre-scripted segment and act like you didn't just spend the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television." Pascal's voice was steady now, carrying the weight of absolute finality. "This is exactly what's wrong with this industry. The show must go on, even when it's built on cruelty." Kimmel's face went ashen, as he realized Pascal wasn't going to give him an easy out. "Pedro, come on. This is television. We're entertainers. Sometimes things get heated, but—" "Entertainers?" Pascal interrupted, fully removing his microphone and holding it in his hand like evidence. "You think what just happened was entertaining? You think attacking someone's family history, their heritage, their profession, and their integrity is entertainment?" The audience was completely captivated, witnessing what felt like a public reckoning. Some were openly recording on their phones, understanding they were watching history unfold. The usual late-night rhythm had been completely destroyed, replaced by something far more real and uncomfortable. Pascal turned to address the audience directly, ignoring Kimmel entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand something. I came here tonight as a guest on this show, expecting a normal interview. Instead, I was subjected to a planned attack designed to humiliate me for having opinions and using my platform to support causes I believe in." The audience murmured, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Some began to applaud Pascal, starting slowly but growing in volume and intensity. The sound seemed to physically wound Kimmel, who stood helplessly behind his desk. "This is what happens when you dare to speak out about injustice in this industry," Pascal continued, his voice carrying clearly through the studio. "This is the price of having principles. But you know what? I'd rather pay that price than compromise my values for the sake of a comfortable interview." Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "Pedro, you're being dramatic. This is just television, just entertainment. Don't make it bigger than it is." Pascal turned back to face him, and the look in his eyes was devastating. "Just entertainment? Jimmy, your show reaches millions of people every night. Your words have power, influence, impact. When you use that platform to tear people down, to mock their beliefs, to attack their families, that's not just entertainment. That's abuse of power." The silence that followed was profound. Even Kimmel's band members were staring in shocked silence. The host looked around desperately for support, but found none. His own audience was applauding his guest's criticism of him. Pascal placed his microphone carefully on Kimmel's desk, the small sound echoing in the quiet studio. "I've spent my career trying to tell stories that matter, to represent characters, with dignity, to use whatever influence I have for good. I won't sit here and be diminished by someone who's forgotten what it means to treat people with basic respect." Kimmel's voice was barely a whisper. "Pedro, please, can we just—" "No." The single word cut through everything. Pascal stepped back from the desk, creating clear physical distance between them. "I'm done. I'm done with hosts who think cruelty is comedy. I'm done with platforms that reward tearing people down. And I'm especially done with people who attack others for caring about something bigger than themselves." The actor began walking toward the edge of the stage, his movements deliberate and dignified despite the chaos of the moment. The audience's applause grew louder, many people now standing. It was clear whose side they were on. Kimmel called after him desperately. "Where are you going? We're in the middle of a show. Pascal stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time. You want to know where I'm going, Jimmy? I'm going home to my family. I'm going to continue supporting the causes I believe in. I'm going to keep telling stories that matter. And I'm going to remember this moment as an example of everything I never want to become. With that, Pedro Pascal walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, leaving behind a stunned studio and a host whose career would never recover from what had just transpired. The audience continued applauding long after Pascal disappeared, while Kimmel stood alone at his desk, the wreckage of his reputation scattered around him. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of Kimmel's humiliation as he struggled to find words that would never come. The silence stretched on, broken only by the continued applause for a man who had chosen dignity over convenience, principle over profit. Within hours, clips of the confrontation were viral across every social platform, with overwhelming support for Pascal and devastating criticism of Kimmel's conduct. The incident became a watershed moment, sparking industry-wide conversations about responsibility, respect, and the true cost of entertainment built on cruelty. Jimmy Kimmel's ratings plummeted immediately, advertisers began pulling out, and his network was forced to address the incident publicly. Meanwhile, Pedro Pascal's career soared to new heights, with directors, producers, and fans celebrating his integrity and courage. The confrontation that was meant to destroy Pascal instead destroyed the man who orchestrated it, proving that sometimes standing up for yourself and your values is the most powerful performance of all.